good afternoon to everybody, and firstly, let me apologise for not being able to be with you today. Circumstances beyond my control. Would have been a delight to be in Madrid, a city with a football team that can actually score goals. For my sins, I am a Liverpool supporter, and there are not many people in England that would admit to that these days. So the presentation that I'm going to give from England is by PowerPoint. In order to put the PowerPoint onto the screen, I have to switch off the video, which I'm sure will delight some of you, and I shall do that now. Just waiting to hear from Ana. Perfecto. That must be Spanish, I'm guessing. So again, apologies for the confusion. So firstly, let me introduce you to something about the university from which I come. Established in 1826, we were the third university to be established in England after Oxford and Cambridge in 1826. Now, I thought I'd give you an interesting fact to start with, and that is the gentleman that you can see sitting in the picture, which is hopefully on the left of your screen, is actually Jeremy Bentham, the philosopher who was one of the founding fathers of UCL back in the early 1800s. Now that is not a wax figure of Jeremy Bentham. It is actually Jeremy Bentham's mummified body. And apologies to anybody that finds that slightly off-putting. It was Jeremy Bentham's wish that he would sit for all eternity in the cloisters at UCL. And so the facilities management team have a very, very unusual role at University College London, and that is to look after the body of Jeremy and to open the doors every morning and to close the doors every evening. And one of the things that most visitors, particularly first-time visitors to University College London, will do is to take a selfie, which I assume is a word with which you are familiar, a picture of themselves with the mobile phone with Jeremy in the background, and you can commonly see queues of people. Quite interesting. And if you Google Jeremy Bentham mummified body, there are some quite gruesome pictures of the cleaning process, which I won't, you'll be pleased to hear, put on the screen today. So in terms of facility management at UCL, we run a master's in facility and environment management. But the main thing that I do from day to day is to be involved with research and development projects. We very much pride ourselves on delivering research which is connected to industry. None of the researchers that we have sit in the university. They are all out in industry. I call it, for other researchers at UCL, the workplace is my laboratory. Recognising that today is going to be very difficult, given that I cannot see you and therefore I can't respond to the feeling of the audience, I'd like to offer the Twitter details that you can see there, and also my email details. I'm very happy to correspond with anybody. If you would like to add me on Twitter now, I'm quite happy to carry on the discussions later on after I finish speaking, because of course we're not really going to be able to do a question and answer session. So let's very quickly just kick off with an old definition of sustainability. And I wanted to bring the Brundtland Report sustainability definition back into your memories because it's going to be relevant later on. So as you can see there, sustainable development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, later on, I'm going to say what I think that doesn't say. I think that's commonly misinterpreted, and I'm going to suggest a way that that particular definition is good because it can take us forward. So before I go on to really talk about, I suppose, the message that I'd like to leave you with, because I believe I'm the last speaker before you disappear into the bars and restaurants of Madrid, and I'm very envious of that. I'd like to talk just briefly about two of the research projects that we've run over the last few years at UCL with various industrial partners. So the first project, which I will talk about very shortly, condition-based maintenance and business-centered maintenance, they're very closely linked, these two. Now, here is one positive aspect of my not being there. Sitting with you in the audience today, somewhere in the dark, I'm told, is Ruhul Amin, Mr. Ruhul Amin, who is currently a research engineer with me, and I'm sure would be delighted to talk to anyone who's interested about the condition-based maintenance project that he has been running for nearly 4 years, and we'll move on to that in a moment. But remember that Ruhul must have a badge on, and you can identify him, I'm sure. We have an asset obsolescence management program running. We have various different innovation systems projects that we're running, focused on facilities management, as they all are. We have also an asset management system that we're developing, and another one that I'm going to talk about a little bit today, greening the supply chain. That is just a list of the projects that we are running at this building. So Ministry of Defence main building in London, and on that picture on the right of your screen, also slightly to the right for a few years, not the obvious building, but the one slightly behind it, was the old War Office. And this was also a project that the same group of researchers that I'm with were working on. Now it tends to be focused just on the large building that you can see there, say nearly 93,000 square meters, a lot of people going through. What makes this a fascinating study for us is that it's not only a government building, it's the Ministry of Defence building, which means that it is a very secure environment, a highly secure environment, and of course it is a clear target for terrorist organisations around the world. So as you can imagine, security there is of the highest priority. It's one of the things that the facilities managers there are obliged to comply with 100%, as they always say. It's the one thing, should they fail on that, for which they can actually be immediately dismissed. So it's of the utmost importance. The other thing that makes this quite fascinating is that it is a 25-year private finance initiative. So a public-private partnership refurbishment, which was completed around about 10 or 11 years ago. It's also interesting because in the basement of that building, they have preserved King Henry VIII's wine cellar. So a piece of history that is well over 1,000 years old is buried in the basement of this building, and quite remarkable it is too, if you ever get the opportunity to visit. Ruhul, if he is there, if you can find him, will tell you all about this. And it's, of course, the sad thing is that in order to visit it, you need to be fortunate enough to be able to visit the building. So I'm assuming that most people there will be familiar with how these private finance initiative, PPP, public partnership projects operate. If you're not, we can tweet or email about that happily for the rest of the evening if you wish. Another couple of pictures of the building, just so you can get a feel for the scale and I suppose, the grandeur. This is one of the British government's landmark buildings in London. This particular photograph, you can see in the background to the right, the tower which houses the Big Ben. Now, Big Ben is the name of the bell, not the name of the tower, but it is commonly referred to as Big Ben by most visitors, and I probably could say a lot of Londoners as well. You can see the wheel over the top, that is the London Eye, a Ferris wheel, which when it was installed was intended to be temporary, but I think it's become part of the London landscape now, and I think unlikely to be removed. So to the project example, the first example, which is Ruhul's project, I can only give you a limited amount of information on this, partly because Ruhul has been running this for 4 years, and the truth is Ruhul is the expert on this. I oversee the project, but Ruhul is the project manager. But what I wanted to emphasize today, because we're here to talk about sustainability in this particular session, is that every project has its sustainable elements. And I think that's important. Before I move on, I should say thank you to Skanska and to HCP, who are the funders for the research on this project. Without these people, nothing would happen. So the first slide that has actually been provided by Ruhul, what I wanted to do was pull out what we're trying to achieve, and rather than read it, you're perfectly capable, I'm sure, of reading the English. The bit I wanted to pull out to emphasize is the reduction in energy. Now, we believe that we will achieve over the period of operation of this research, and it's an ongoing piece of research, it's an ongoing system that we've developed, around about 20% of the electrical supply of the services that are used to run various assets within the building. So what are we actually talking about? We're talking about rotary equipment, we're talking about pumps, fans and compressors, where we've actually installed a number of sensors at various points to measure certain data, including and in particular the vibration of these pieces of equipment, to identify when they are running well and when they are not running well. Now, the main driver here is that within the Ministry of Defence there are certain critical assets that cannot be allowed to fail. So the backup systems tend to be quite significant. What we're trying to do by perfecting the maintenance technique is to only maintain these assets when they require it, rather than a simple planned maintenance process. So that gives us several advantages. It increases the asset life, it maximises the efficiency, and critically, in particular for the Ministry of Defence, it reduces the risk of unexpected failures. So secondly, just again another slide that Ruhul has put forward. It provides various data, vibration, acoustics. It provides us with asset usage data, of course, because very often these pumps are not always running. It'll be sometimes the backup will be running and sometimes the main pump will be running. So actually it's important that we know the number of hours that they've run. Now that's fairly basic data to collect. But we're also collecting environmental data, the room temperature, the humidity of the room, so that we can establish over many, many years how effectively or efficiently these various assets run within different environments. So I suppose the obvious example would be if you run a particular piece of equipment on a roof exposed to the wind and the rain, and in the UK the snow, and then suddenly maybe in the summer we have sunshine, you can imagine that the performance of that asset will be affected in some way by the different weather patterns. So we're trying to establish what the positive and the negative aspects of environment are to the efficiency of these various pieces of equipment. So that ongoing research, we've actually got to the point where we now have a system that is operational, that can be transferred from the Ministry of Defence across to other portfolios, other contracts. Now, it's being sponsored by Skanska, and Skanska are rolling out this particular piece of work across most of their sites. These include, for example, St Barts Hospital in central London, which is one of the biggest hospitals in the UK. So this research is actually delivering real change for good within the UK in particular. We're very, very willing to work with anybody in any country that wants to learn and understand what we're doing, but it's making a big difference to particularly the Skanska portfolio in the UK. So that was an example probably of something quite technical, which, as I say, Rahul will be happy to discuss over a coffee later on. Something a little bit more management. One of the key things is that we have decided that money can be saved by being green, and I don't think that's new. I think I'm right in saying I haven't been able to watch the conference today, but I believe you've just heard two speakers talking about managing energy. Yes, we recognise that there is a lot of savings to be made by managing energy within the particular building, but we're also interested in managing our supply chain in order to deliver green savings down that supply chain. So what we did was quite radically, and this is going back now about 5 or 6 years, was we said to the supply chain at the Ministry of Defence that we were going green and that there were going to be certain rules that they would need to follow that would be enforced in a few years' time. So we wanted to work out how we could deliver a model that would allow them to be modus supply chain compliant. I should say actually that the word modus on the screen in front of you is actually the Ministry of Defence management company for the PFI. It sort of stands for Ministry of Defence Unified Services, but you very rarely actually hear that said. So it was modus in managing its supply chain that determined to set up this assessment model with 28 criteria, so we were able to rank the different members of the supply chain. It started out simply by a desk-based assessment looking at what the risks would be for each of the different companies, each of the different services. We went out, we interviewed, and we carried out site visits, and we spoke to the various firms. This is the sort of thing we came up with. So this has been around now for about 5 years. It isn't perfect, but it's a means to try and engage with the supply chain, to try and encourage them to become green, so that the green credentials can be claimed by the people at the top of the supply chain. Now, there are also potential financial savings here, which we would hope would be passed up as well. So depending on how aggressively you wish to pursue these items, there is also money in these things as well. So there you can see health and safety factors. I'm not going to read through all of these. I'm sure you'll be glad to hear, but this is just for illustration purposes to give you an idea the sort of thing that we do. Here we have ethical sourcing. I'm sure that the people there, I'm sure that Anna and the staff there will happily make these slides available to you. If I go through them rather quickly, because I'm being told I have 5 minutes left. It's interesting how difficult it is to regulate time when you're sitting remotely. Okay, I want to say to you today, as I maybe move on to the main message quickly, that I think things like environmental certification can actually be part of the problem. Now, we've been saying for years that it's thumping our fists on the table in anger, saying that we must all buy in to the idea of environmental certification. Why would I say that it's now become part of the problem? Well, partly I think because once we have it, we think the job is done. And I think that is just not the case. So I think it's time for us, facilities management people, to take a lead, to move into a new direction and a change of emphasis. So a mentality that leaves the environment undamaged to one that leaves the environment better than it was before. So what did Brundtland say? leave the environment so that future generations can also live from it, is, I suppose, rewording. It doesn't say be zero carbon. So the future then is becoming carbon positive for me. It's no longer enough to aim for carbon neutral. We need to take action. So very quickly, let's just look at what we do now. These are the things that drive us to sustainability. Now, government legislation in the UK is one of the things that really drives us. That's what started the ball rolling. It's what started us down the route to environmental sustainability. But now we've also learned that we can make money, we can save money through financial drivers in terms of the way we do sustainability. By using less power, we save money. It's simple. And it's not just energy that we can save money through. Our own internal processes and drivers, and our customers drive us too, so our reputation is important. But I think it's time for us to accept that the environmental driver is very important. Very quickly again, there's the route to the traditional route to carbon zero buildings. Up on the right, carbon positive. This has to be the way we move forward. So I'm calling for a change of mentality across the world really, but today across Europe. There's our traditional route. At the top we have purchase carbon offsets. So if we're looking for carbon neutral, purchasing offsets tends to be an essential. I'd like to really end by saying to you, go and take a look at the Climate Positive Development Network and the report that they offer. This is a group of global cities tackling climate change. They're actually putting resources into the changing the way things work. And there are certain cities that have really taken the lead in terms of climate change. Here are the recommendations from the report, and the ones in bold. Number 2, cities should reach out to partners to collaborate. So let's reach out to other facilities managements. Let's reach out to the building next door. Let's reach out to the organisation that doesn't have the expertise that we have. Let's make the change. Let's use the knowledge and the intelligence that we have to help those that have not. The third thing, the private sector should actively seek to partner with cities to capture unique opportunities. Speak to the government in Madrid, engage with the government, get help from the government. Let's try and buy into this new world order that we want to create. If you want to be inspired, take a look at the Mahindra World City in Jaipur, India. This is a relatively poor country taking a stand. I won't read that out, but the managing director of the Mahindra Group has bought into the RISE philosophy, committing to driving sustainable practices. Mahindra World City, which you can see on the internet, built on the vision of transforming urban landscapes. Now, I know this is a massive, very, very big development in India, and most of you will be involved in the management of much more modest environments. But I would say that now is the time to really begin to change, to think about carbon positive. A simple roadmap that you can use. Determining your baseline, thinking about impact reduction, and then think about the credit measures that you can make. Now, those credit measures need not be on your own site. It can be by joint venture with organisations in other parts of Madrid or wherever you come from, by joint ventures with the building next door, or even the buildings that you have elsewhere across the European Union. So let's begin to repair the damage together. Let's deliver a new carbon positive philosophy, an expectation of getting better and better. Let's influence the others where we can. Let's green our supply chains, using maybe more sophisticated means than the one that I've talked about earlier. And let's work with supply chains on becoming carbon positive in our projects. So I finished, as I say, there's my Twitter. Again, why the pictures? This is the World War II destruction of UCL, which I thought was just an interesting picture to end with. We were talking about trying to avoid destroying the planet. So UCL, as it was bombed, interesting point, the University College London staff were moved to Wales, if anybody's familiar with Wales, in 1941. As a result, a very large number of academic staff resigned from their positions rather than go to Wales. So I hope there are no Welsh people there that I've offended. And thank you very much for listening. And I wish I could have been in Spain, but I think that's me. So thank you and goodbye.